This is Al Jazeera.
Hello, I'm Rob Matheson. This is the News Hour live from Doha. Coming up in the next 60 minutes, Russia says limited traffic is resumed on a crucial Crimean bridge damaged by an explosion earlier on Saturday. A funeral is held for a 17-year-old Palestinian killed in an Israeli raid in Jenin. At least 4 Palestinian teenagers have been killed in 24 hours. Funerals in Burkina Faso for dozens of soldiers killed last month. The attack led to the second military coup in months. Haiti's government requests an international security force after weeks of violence as water, fuel and basic goods run out.
And I'm Peter Stemmert with your sport. Manchester City are heading to the top of the Premier League. They lead Southampton at half-time. And in Formula One, Max Verstappen closes in on back-to-back world titles, clinching pole position for Sunday's Japanese Grand Prix.
Russia's transport ministry says limited traffic has resumed on a Crimean bridge that was damaged by an explosion earlier on Saturday. It's a road and rail link that connects mainland Russia with the peninsula. Security camera footage appears to show a huge blast at the Kerch Strait Bridge earlier on Saturday morning. Russia's National Anti-Terrorism Committee says it was caused by a truck bomb and that 3 people were killed. Part of the road section has now collapsed and a fuel tanker train on the rail overpass caught fire. The bridge is a vital supply route for Russia's forces in southern Ukraine, especially the rail link that's been disrupted. Mohammed Val begins our coverage.
This was the moment caught on amateur video cameras at 6:07 a.m. local time in Crimea, purportedly showing a cargo truck exploding on the motorway parallel to the Kerch Bridge. The blast was so huge, flames and debris crossed to the other lane and reached a fuel cargo train that was passing by. Russia's government was quick to respond. The Speaker of the State Duma described the incident as a terrorist attack and an act of war on Russia. President Vladimir Putin has ordered an investigation committee be set up to find out who's behind it and how it happened. The Kerch Bridge, also called the Crimea Bridge, is one of Russia's most vital supply lines and its only land link with the Crimean Peninsula. It was opened by Vladimir Putin in 2018, 4 years after Russia annexed the Crimean territory from Ukraine. The explosion caused 2 sections of the bridge to collapse and several train carriages caught fire. Traffic on the entire bridge came to a standstill. The sea-ferrying arch under the bridge was not affected. But this will likely pose several challenges for Russia's capabilities to supply its troops and other administrative operations in Crimea.
OK, we've got 2 correspondents on the story this hour. Rory Challens is live for us in Kyiv. First, we're going to speak to Mohammed Val, who's in Moscow for us. Mohammed, first of all, what do we know about the latest with the situation on the bridge?
Well, even though the damage seems to be huge on that bridge, the authorities there are saying that at 10 minutes, 5 and 10 minutes this afternoon, a train has begun its trip to Moscow from Simferopol. And another train is ready also to depart to St. Petersburg. So these news indicate that, you know, the Russians have been quick to try to fix a part of the damage, or at least prepare whatever is left of the road and bridge. And that's a strong message to the euphoric people in Ukraine and the leadership and other Ukrainians who have been celebrating what happened to the bridge, probably to tell them that the bridge is still okay and transportation hasn't been completely disrupted. Russia is ready to resume its transportation operations on that bridge.
Mohammed, Vladimir Putin, when he opened this bridge, said that that if the bridge was attacked, there would be a response. Obviously, people are going to now be watching to see what kind of reaction Moscow is going to have to this. Do we have any sense of how Moscow is responding?
The response comes in the form of a very interesting appointment. This is the first time a commander has been appointed for all the troops and all the armies that are contributing, the Russian forces that are contributing in what's called here the special military operation in eastern and southern Ukraine. Commander Sergei Surovikin, he also led in the past, in 2017, he led the Russian intervention in Syria. That intervention was marked by huge devastation on cities, particularly in Aleppo, the bombing. He is the head of the armed forces. And the indication here, or the understanding here, is that this means a new phase in the war in Ukraine, or what Russia calls a special military operation. Also, we have heard that the Chechen leader, Ramzan Kadyrov, is mobilizing 70,000 troops to send them to the front line. There is a lot of talk here in Moscow about the inevitability of a Russian reaction to what's happening, including what happened today, and also including the reverses that the Russian army has received, or those defeats that have been reported on the front line during the last couple of weeks. Russia saying it has the means and the capabilities, and its patience has limits.
Mohammed Val talking to us from Moscow. Mohammed, thank you very much indeed. I want to bring in Rory Challens, who's talking to us now from Kyiv. So what's Ukraine been saying about all of this, Rory?
Well, there has been a lot of insinuation from Ukrainian officials, but no explicit confirmation that it was Ukraine that was behind this. We've heard earlier in the day from Mikhailo Podolyak, who is one of the main advisors to President Zelensky, who said quite austerely that this bridge, Crimea bridge, was basically just the beginning. Everything illegal must be destroyed, everything stolen must be returned to Ukraine, everything occupied by Russia must be expelled. But later on in the day, he changed his tone a little bit and actually suggested that the explosion was the result of infighting between the Russian Ministry of Defense, the FSB, and mercenary groups. He said that the truck that blew up on the bridge had come from the Russian side of the bridge, and that suggested that the origin of the explosion was Russia. Other officials have gone for more humorous treatments, lots of memes being shared around. The Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine tweeted earlier with something that had a picture of the burning bridge and then Marilyn Monroe singing "Happy Birthday, Mr. President," joined together in one tweet. Yesterday, Friday, was the 70th birthday of the Russian President, Vladimir Putin. But I think there is a certain worry here about what the possible response from Russia might be. It's interesting, I have to say, that the Russians are moving so quickly to get transport moving back on the bridge again, perhaps much too hastily. The transport, the cars that are going are being allowed through in very limited numbers. They're talking about having trains going as well again. That might suggest that the Russians are going to try and put this incident behind them as quickly as possible and move on to try and downplay it. Of course, Vladimir Putin has said that a strike or any attack on Crimea, Zaporizhia, Kherson, Donetsk, Lugansk is an attack on Russia, and that Russia has the rights to respond to it with all available means. But we don't know quite yet what that means and how far he's willing to go.
Rory, thank you very much indeed. Rory Challens bringing us up to date from Kyiv. OK, I think it might help to give you an indication of the region around where the bridge is. The area in red on this map is under the control of Russian forces and their separatist allies. The Kerch Road and Rail Bridge links mainland Russia and Crimea. It's a vital land route supplying Russia's military in southern Ukraine. Ukrainian forces have been pushing a counter-offensive in the east and in the southern Kherson region. I want to bring in Alexander Vothkravers. He's editor-in-chief at Swiss Military Review, and he's joining us from Geneva. Very good to have you with us, sir, on Al Jazeera. Given your experience, given that you've seen the footage of what happened at the bridge, if you were going to produce results like this, how would you go about it?
The possibility of a truck carrying explosives, and we're talking here several hundred kilos of explosives, is probably not going to produce this much damage as the pictures, the footage that you have presented. Certainly it's going to ruin the asphalt, so the visible part of the bridge, the functional part of the bridge, but definitely the structure is not going to be necessarily impacted unless you have people coming down from the truck using shaped charge. And therefore, I think we need to take with a grain of salt the story that is being told to us about how this truck arrived there and all of a sudden produced all of this damage.
So if it wasn't a truck bomb, what are the alternatives?
Let's take this in reverse. If you want to produce this kind of a result, a missile or something that flies horizontally is not going to do the job, and this would require a bomb, so a ballistic trajectory weapon. It could also be a long-range missiles such as ATACMS. So the longer range version of the HIMARS would be a possibility, but they would most probably need several hundred kilos of explosives in order to produce this kind of effect. So the most realistic is two explanations. One would be a laser-guided bomb of at least 125 kilos. And the other possibility would be sabotage from special forces or from partisans. And I think this is something to explore, because your discussion with the previous guest was what can we expect from now? And I would say that we are seeing an extension of the conflict. The Ukrainians are now bringing the fight into the rear areas, the logistical supply of Russian forces. With the pictures that you have shown, we've seen a container train, a fuel container train on fire. This train contains 1.6 million liters of fuel. That's the equivalent of 2 days necessary for fuel, for transportation, for movement of the Russian forces that are presently fighting in the Kherson area. So even if railroad transport has been re-established, which some of your reporters have messaged us, even then there's going to be a very short supply, and there's going to be difficulties in the resupply of aviation, resupply of tanks, resupply of artillery munitions. And definitely the Ukrainians are bringing the fight into the rear areas of Russian forces.
One would imagine, taking one of your scenarios, that if this was done by individuals that carried out this an act of sabotage, that's going to raise questions about the level of security and the efficiency of the security, obviously, on the bridge. I want to ask you about the appointment of General Sergei Surovikin that we were talking about earlier, which was announced today. Given the level of experience that our correspondent Mohammed Val was explaining to us that the General apparently has, does that indicate to you any change of focus or intensity in terms of Russian strategy going forward?
I can second what your colleague has said, but let me add something more. The beginning of this special operation by Russian forces was did not take place under a unified command. There were 5 different army groups that each led an individual, an autonomous operation in the north, in the east, in the south, and so on. And the reason why it was not possible to have a unified command of all of the Russian forces was distance and the lack of technology, the lack of information technology in order to wire or to wrap, to put together all of these command and control facilities and capabilities. So what we are seeing now is certainly the fact that one person and one headquarters is going to plan out and to direct the operation, but it is also a signal that the operation from now on is going to concentrate in one specific area. It may be Luhansk, it may be Donetsk, it may be in the south, but it's not going to be possible for technical reasons that I outlined before. It will not be possible to mount operations in the north, in the south, against Kiev, in and around Kherson, and then something else, and then a political reform that is going to be undertaken in certain territories. All of that is not going to happen together. So what we are seeing is a shrinking of the military operation or the special operation of Russia.
Really interesting to get your thoughts on this. Alexander Voltravers, once again, thank you very much indeed for being with us on Al Jazeera, sir. Thank you.
Have an excellent day.
The UN nuclear watchdog says Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant has been forced to use emergency diesel generators. That's after shelling overnight. Russia and Ukraine blame each other for strikes near Europe's largest nuclear plant. The facility's reactors are shut down, but they still need external power to cool and avoid a nuclear meltdown. The UN Atomic Energy Agency's chief has called for a protection zone around the plant. Plenty more ahead on the News Hour, including we're going to take a look at who in the UK is most at risk if tough public spending cuts come into force. Safety or censorship? The Turkish parliament debates legislation for the media. The government says it'll fight disinformation, but critics tell a different story. And the Women's Rugby World Cup gets underway with some record-breaking games. Details coming up with Peter in sport. There are multiple protests taking place across Iran against the government's handling of the death of a 22-year-old woman in police custody last month. Police say one person has been killed, but officers were not involved. President Ibrahim Raisi earlier faced demonstrations as he visited a female-only university in Tehran. A wave of public unrest has hit Iran since the death of Mahsa Amini. We're going to speak to Resol Serdar, who's live for us in Tehran. These are among the longest-running protests that we've seen in Iran for quite some time. They seem to be growing as well, as far as we can tell. Just talk us through what's been happening.
Well, after a quiet 3 days public holiday in Iran, today, on Saturday, we have seen that the protests sparked again across the whole country. So big rallies, widespread protests have been held in Tehran, in Shiraz, in Karaj, in Kerman, in Isfahan, and in Sanandaj. So these are the largest cities of Iran, and the protests are just taking place across all of these cities in multiple areas. So today, for the first time in Tehran, in the capital, we have seen that the protests were taking place around the Grand Bazaar, and one of the police hut also has been set on fire. This is quite significant because Grand Bazaar in Tehran is an important business hub, and any disruption in business in Tehran, in the capital, could further deteriorate the already struggling economy in the country. So last week, the epicenter of the protests was universities. However, today we have seen that now the protests are once again on the streets, and particularly the ones that took place in the city of Sanandaj in Kurdistan province were quite violent. So there were the reports of several people being killed. However, the security forces are saying that only one person has been killed. So the protesters are accusing the security forces of shooting or using the live ammunition. However, the commander general of the police forces in Iran, Hussein Ashdari, says that these bullets that were shot are not at the service of the security forces. He claims that the provocateurs are using that